Australia has one of the most lauded retirement savings programs in the world, but how efficient is our superannuation industry really? Well, a new report from the Grattan Institute says that the fees that are charged are adding a lot of cost to it. In fact, taking them off or reforming them would add as much as 15% to superannuants' balances. I'm joined by Jim Menefee from the Grattan Institute. Jim, what did you find?
So as you said, Jackson, what we would find is that sure, we've got a fantastic fund of money that's been built up over many years, and that's a terrific plus of our system, but the big minus is that we're paying far too much for it to be managed. We really need to get that under control. And as you said, it could be easily as much as 15% of people's money will just be missing by the time they retire on account of excessive fees.
Now, you found that for sort of high fee accounts, there was only a return of as much as 2% net. I mean, that's not really helping to grow the pile, is it?
Yeah, one of the other things that we tested was whether high fee funds wash their own face in the form of higher gross returns, and the answer is on average that they do not. Over the last decade, real returns have not been high. Gross real returns across the whole sector are only a touch over 4%, 4.25%, and 1.25% of that has been taken out by fees. So fees really are a material driver of what people are going to have left over at the end of the day, and as we say in the report, can make all the difference between steak and spaghetti in retirement.
Now, one of the big problems, of course, facing Australia is an ageing population about to retire. I mean, it's really critical that there is enough left in the kitty for Australians, so it's actually quite urgent for some reform to happen, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And successive governments have made policy reforms with the ambition that they would get fees under control. But so far there's very little evidence. Certainly Super Choice from the mid-2000s didn't bring fees down much, maybe 10 basis points, 0.1%. And the current round of reforms that were introduced by the previous government, again, may make a small difference, but we believe no more than about 10 basis points. And that will leave us far above the OECD median and really triple what we think a reformed system could do, that would still preserve a lot of choice, but would put intense wholesale competition on fees, particularly for defaults, that is, for the accounts that are allocated to people who don't make an active choice.
Now, that's quite interesting because those default accounts generally would be, I imagine, quite lowly managed. I mean, they could go into a tracker fund that follows the market, for instance, or go in cash, or or infrastructure bonds, and therefore they don't require those kind of high fees.
Indeed, and I think it's important principle to recognise that people do feel that superannuation is their money and that they should be free to do what they believe is best, and we support that. But to have defaults as we do in this country, where the average fees are about 1% of funds under management per year, is well over double, maybe triple, what could be achieved with a more wholesale model.
Now, what kind of reforms do you think would work?
So what's worked around the world is either a much more centralised model with less choice, and we think that that's probably not the right fit given how Australians feel about their super, although it does generate very good results just with less choice. A model that preserves choice but drives much better returns is one that subjects the default products to really a wholesale tender that would be run by the government, controlling for some asset classes, as you alluded to before, and may the lowest fee win, essentially, for pre-qualifying funds that meet the APRA standards and so forth. Now, Chile introduced a system of that type a few years ago, and they've seen default fees drop to about a third of their former level. So you can get these very substantial savings, and for $500 billion worth of default money, that's approximately the amount, you're soon talking about multiple billions saved every year.
So talk me through how these default accounts would work.
So we recognise that you can't just have a pure fee-based competition, because then funds will just produce a cash product and you'll get poor returns. Instead, what you'll need to do is to set up one or potentially multiple different asset allocation ranges. So you could say it's 60% equities or what have you. You could have an age distribution if you wanted. And then wholesale providers would essentially team up with the super funds that have got really good front ends for managing people's accounts. And we would expect that the winners of those will put very intense price pressure on. Now, there's a range of wrinkles to how to make the tenders work. How it works in Chile is you get access to, as the winner, to all of the new default accounts that are set up over a 2-year period. And we think that seems like a fairly sensible model. So that's the first of our big proposed reforms. But what's been found in Chile is that wholesale pressure on defaults hasn't led to much price drops in the rest of the market. And we think that more needs to be done to increase price pressure well beyond the defaults. And one way to do that we think is very attractive is what we're calling make tax time super choice time. So every year when you did your tax return, you would also be faced with some summary information about your current account and the same information about the winner of this default, and you'd be provided with the opportunity, if you're doing an e-tax return, to switch on the spot. Now, not everybody will want to switch, but those that do would be able to.
That sounds like hell to the ears of the superannuation industry, I imagine,
Well,
because
I
they're
think-
quite reliant upon the idea that I sign up once and then for the next 30 years, for instance, you know, they've got my money regardless.
Look, there are some funds who I'm sure won't welcome it, but there will be others who know that they've got really first-class processes, they've got excellent asset management in-house or as a partner, and they will jump at the chance to rapidly multiply their funds under management. So again, it's going to be horses for courses, and not everybody will love it.
But there has been sort of talk of a lot of super funds merging because they just can't sort of sustain a model of so many different funds rattling around the place. I mean, wouldn't that do the same thing?
So, look, you can imagine that governance pressure or other forms of reforms might ultimately get you there. But let me just give you this fact. Over the last decade, the number of funds has shrunk very markedly. The average funds under management by an APRA regulated fund has increased sixfold. And what people anticipated going back a decade is that there would be a big scale benefit. Now, it's true, big funds are a lot more efficient. 6 times as big, you're normally about 20% more efficient. What's happened to the scale curve in the last decade? It's risen to exactly offset that scale dividend. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? And the answer is that non-fee-based competition through distribution, marketing, product features, and choice, which largely doesn't drive genuine higher returns at the end of the day, have absorbed all of those scale benefits. And we're concerned that the same thing is going to happen to the cost-reducing reforms that were brought in as part of Stronger Super.
So all those benefits have been eaten up in fees, effectively?
Yes.
Incredible. Jim Menefee, thank you very much.
Thanks.